A few years ago, Doña Carmen, a 78-year-old woman, began to notice something strange. She no longer clearly recognized her grandchildren's faces when they came to visit. Sometimes she mistook one for another, and other times she pretended to recognize them so as not to worry her family. She thought it was simply an age thing, a normal sign of getting older. So she let it slide. She didn't seek medical help, didn't get her eyesight checked, and gradually got used to living with that shadow that clouded her vision. Over time, Carmen stopped reading her favorite newspaper because the letters seemed to dance before her eyes. She also stopped going out for walks alone because she didn't feel safe crossing the street. What no one imagined was that along with her vision, she was also beginning to lose something else, her memory. Years later, doctors gave her a devastating diagnosis. Carmen had dementia. Stories like Carmen's are not isolated cases. Every day, thousands of older adults around the world ignore the first symptoms of vision loss. They think it's a normal process, that old glasses or habit are enough to carry on. But what many don't know is that vision and the brain are intimately connected. And when you neglect your sight, you are also neglecting your mind. Science has made it clear, uncorrected vision loss can speed up cognitive decline and significantly increase the risk of developing dementia. It's not just about seeing worse, it's about how the lack of visual stimuli reduces brain activity, fosters social isolation, and opens the door to memory problems and confusion. That's why I want you to pay close attention today. In this video, you'll discover the hidden reasons why untreated vision loss directly affects your brain. You'll hear real stories that show this link, and most importantly, you'll learn what steps you can take right now to protect your sight and your mind, no matter your age. And before we continue, I'd like to get to know you a little better. Tell me in the comments how old you are and where you're watching from. That way, I'll know from which part of the world you're joining this conversation and what stage of life you're in. Truth 1. Vision and the brain are more connected than you imagine. When we think about sight, we usually imagine only the eyes. However, the reality is much deeper. Seeing doesn't happen only in the eyes, it happens in the brain. The eyes work like cameras that capture light and images, but it's the brain that interprets that information, that gives shape to the colors, the faces, and the memories that become imprinted in our minds. Every time you read a word, recognize a friend, or contemplate a landscape, millions of neural connections activate. Vision constantly stimulates the brain and keeps it moving. It's like a mental gym where the eyes deliver the raw material and the brain processes it. When sight begins to fail and isn't corrected with glasses, treatments, or medical checkups, the brain receives less information. Imagine that suddenly your TV screen becomes blurry and full of interference. After a while, you stop paying attention because you don't really understand what's happening on it. The same happens in our brain. When the visual signal grows weak, it gradually stops processing it with the same intensity. This has a dangerous consequence. Without enough exercise, the brain areas in charge of memory, language, and attention weaken. It's like a muscle that goes unused and atrophies. And as that deterioration advances, it opens the door to memory problems and a greater risk of dementia. Let's think about Don Miguel, an 80-year-old man who had been very active his whole life. He loved reading historical novels and meeting friends at the neighborhood cafe. However, he began to notice that the newspaper's letters were increasingly hard to read and that everything looked blurry when he walked down the street. Like many, he thought it was normal aging and didn't get checked. Little by little, Miguel stopped reading. He also began to decline social invitations because he didn't want to admit he could no longer clearly see the faces or expressions of those around him. Over time, his friends noticed that he repeated stories, forgot names, and seemed less interested in conversation. What at first seemed only a vision problem turned into evident cognitive decline. Miguel's story reflects a hard truth. Uncorrected vision loss is not a simple inconvenience, it's a silent threat to brain health. By letting the eyes struggle, we reduce the flow of information that keeps our mind active. And by reducing that stimulation, we give dementia fertile ground to grow. That's why understanding this connection is the first step in prevention. It's not enough to accept that eyesight weakens with age. We must act, look for solutions, and correct the problem before it has more serious consequences. And now, I want to ask you something. Did you know your eyes and your mind are so closely linked? If this message is making you think, type the word vision in the comments. That way, I'll know you want to care for your sight and your brain at the same time. Truth 2. The impact of loneliness when vision is lost. When a person starts to lose vision and doesn't correct it, more than image clarity dims. The desire to be with others dims too. Someone who can't see well begins to avoid family gatherings, meetups with friends, or social activities. Not because they love them any less, but because the simple fact of not clearly distinguishing faces, failing to recognize expressions, or not feeling safe on the street generates anxiety and shame. Imagine arriving at a party and not immediately recognizing who's greeting you, or hearing your name but not being able to identify where the voice comes from. The insecurity this causes leads many older adults to prefer staying home. At first, it's one invitation declined, then two, and finally, it becomes a habit: isolation. Doña Teresa's story makes this clear. She was 75 when she began to notice she could no longer read her friends' lips or make out the gestures of those around her at church. At first, she pretended she understood, nodded her head, and smiled. But inside her, a fear grew: being ridiculed or being unable to follow a conversation. Little by little, she started inventing excuses not to go out, not to meet up. What began as a vision problem turned into a social problem. Over time, Teresa spent entire days without speaking to anyone. Her children noticed she was quieter, more forgetful, and seemed to lose interest in things she once enjoyed. Science explains this change. Social isolation is one of the most powerful factors that accelerate the onset of dementia. When we stop interacting with others, the brain loses one of its most valuable forms of stimulation: conversation, laughter, shared memory. Loneliness forced by vision loss is a silent trap. It not only steals moments of joy, it also steals mental and cognitive health. And what's most worrying is that families often don't notice until it's too late. That's why it's so important not to underestimate this link. Correcting vision isn't only about reading a sign better or watching TV clearly. It's about keeping your connection to others alive, preserving your ability to relate, and protecting the brain from a decline fueled by isolation. And now, I want to ask you, do you know someone who isolated themselves because of vision problems? If so, share it in the comments. Your experience can help others realize how important it is to care for the eyes, so we don't also lose the company and love of those we cherish. Truth. 3. How depression and anxiety come into play. When vision starts to fail and isn't corrected in time, it's not only sharpness that's lost, security is lost as well. Walking down the street becomes a challenge. A curb that once went unnoticed now seems a threat. Stairs inspire fear, and the idea of falling begins to hover insistently in the mind. That constant sense of insecurity generates anxiety, a fear of the everyday that slowly erodes personal confidence. To this anxiety, we add something even more silent: sadness. Not being able to read, to recognize a face clearly, or to enjoy a hobby as before opens the door to depression. And depression in older adults is not simple, fleeting discouragement. It's a condition that directly impacts the brain. Science has shown that chronic depression is associated with inflammatory processes in the nervous system, altering communication between neurons and accelerating cognitive decline. In other words, depression doesn't only hurt your mood, it also weakens memory and reasoning. Don Alfredo's story shows this well. He was 79 and had been a passionate reader his whole life. Novels, newspapers, and crosswords were part of his daily routine. However, when his vision began to fail, he could no longer read easily. At first, he tried with a magnifying glass, but soon grew tired of straining. Little by little, he set books aside, and with them, his enthusiasm faded. Alfredo started spending long hours in his armchair, staring into space. He participated less and less in family conversations because he felt he had nothing to contribute. His grandchildren noticed he no longer made jokes and no longer remembered clearly the stories he used to tell. What began as a visual problem became a spiral of sadness and disinterest that weakened not only his mood, but also his memory. This is the real danger of depression and anxiety born from vision loss. It's not just about feeling sad, but about how that sadness and constant worry alter the brain's chemistry, weakening attention, concentration, and memory. Depression is, in fact, one of the most important risk factors for dementia in older adults. That's why correcting vision doesn't only mean improving visual quality of life, it's also a powerful tool to protect mental health. Every visit to the ophthalmologist, every updated pair of glasses, every timely treatment is a way to defend the joy of living and at the same time to keep the brain strong against decline. Truth 4. The risk of falls and brain injuries. One of the least discussed effects of vision loss is the increased risk of falls. When sight isn't clear, objects in the environment look blurry, distances are misjudged, and obstacles go unnoticed. Something as simple as a poorly lit step or a curb on the sidewalk can turn into a dangerous trap. Uncorrected poor vision multiplies the chances of tripping, bumping into furniture, or slipping on surfaces that once posed no problem. And although we sometimes think a fall only causes a bruise or a fracture, it can actually have far more serious consequences, especially in older people. A head injury can irreversibly alter brain health. Remember Don Ramon, an 81-year-old man who loved walking in the park every morning. One day, while going down some stairs, he failed to see the last step clearly. He tripped and fell forward, hitting his head on the ground. At first, it seemed only a scare, but in the following weeks, his family noticed he no longer remembered things clearly. He had trouble following conversations and seemed confused in simple situations. After medical exams, specialists explained that the blow had sped up cognitive decline that until then had been under control. The relationship between falls, brain injuries, and dementia is direct. Every impact to the head, however small it may seem, can affect areas of the brain responsible for memory, attention, and language. In older adults, where recovery is slower and the brain more vulnerable, such an accident can mark a before and after in quality of life. That's why caring for vision is also a way to prevent falls. Good visual correction allows you to detect obstacles, better judge distances, and move safely. Add to this other protective habits: proper home lighting, clear hallways, the use of canes or handrails when needed. But it all begins at the same point. Don't ignore vision loss. It's important to understand this isn't an isolated eye problem. Sight is the gateway for a huge amount of information to the brain. When that information fails, mobility, safety, and memory are affected. Preventing a stumble today can mean protecting the mind and independence for many years to come. Truth 5. The silent burden of eye diseases. There are eye diseases that progress little by little and with almost no clear signs. They're silent, but over time they steal vision irreversibly. Among the most common in adulthood are cataracts, glaucoma, and macular degeneration. Cataracts appear when the lens, the eye's natural lens, turns opaque. At first, it feels like a slight cloudiness, a sense that colors aren't as bright or that everything looks hazy. Glaucoma, by contrast, damages the optic nerve and often advances without pain or obvious symptoms until a large part of peripheral vision has already been lost. And macular degeneration affects the center of vision, making reading, recognizing faces, or watching TV increasingly difficult. The problem is not only what happens in the eyes. When these diseases aren't treated, the brain receives less visual information. It's like a radio starting to broadcast with heavy interference. After a while, we stop listening closely because we don't understand what it's transmitting. The same happens in the brain. Receiving distorted or incomplete images, it reduces its activity and begins to shut down. That lack of stimulation is fertile ground for cognitive decline. A clear example is Doña Isabel. She was 76 when she was diagnosed with cataracts. Her doctor recommended surgery soon, but Isabel decided to postpone it out of fear and because she felt she still saw well enough. Years went by and her vision grew increasingly blurry. She stopped reading, stopped sewing, and even avoided cooking for fear of messing up measurements. When she finally had the operation, she had not only lost part of her independence, her memory was also weaker. Her family noticed she forgot dates, repeated questions, and seemed disoriented in conversations. These kinds of stories remind us of something essential. Failing to treat eye diseases doesn't only mean losing visual quality, it can also speed up memory loss and increase the risk of dementia. Every year a diagnosis or treatment is delayed is a year in which the brain stops receiving the stimulation it needs to stay active. That's why attending regular checkups and not postponing medical recommendations is crucial. Timely cataract surgery, proper treatment for glaucoma, or correct monitoring of macular degeneration can mean the difference between maintaining a full life or facing accelerated decline, visual and cognitive alike. Truth 6. How vision affects everyday learning and memory. Memory isn't trained only with mental exercises, it's also stimulated by everything we see. When we read a book, our brain doesn't just process words, it also creates images, associations, and memories that strengthen neural connections. When we recognize a loved one's face, we activate brain areas tied to emotion, memory, and identity. And when we learn something new, sight gives us cues, shapes, and colors that make learning more lasting. That's why when vision deteriorates and isn't corrected, memory loses one of its main allies. The brain receives fewer stimuli, it exercises less, and gradually starts to weaken. What used to be a simple pastime, reading, looking at photos, solving a crossword, becomes a frustrating activity and is eventually abandoned. That's what happened to Don Ernesto, a 77-year-old man who enjoyed solving crosswords in the newspaper every afternoon. For him, it wasn't just entertainment, it was a routine that kept his mind active and agile. But when his vision began to fail, the letters turned blurry and the boxes hard to make out. He tried to continue, but the effort tired him more than the pleasure he got from it. Eventually, he set the crosswords aside. At first it seemed a minor detail, but over time his family noticed Ernesto had become more forgetful, that he no longer found words as quickly, and that his mood had dropped. What many didn't understand was that by abandoning that activity, he also lost one of the most valuable ways to exercise his memory. The message is clear. Sight is not only a window to the world, it's also a tool for mental training. Every time we stop using it fully, the brain loses a chance to grow stronger. And when those missed chances pile up, memory suffers. So if you want to protect your mind, start by caring for your eyes. Reading comfortably, recognizing faces clearly, and keeping curiosity alive through vision are among the best defenses against cognitive decline. Truth 7. The vicious circle between vision and dementia. The relationship between sight and the brain isn't one way. It's not only that visual loss increases the risk of dementia, the reverse happens too. Dementia can worsen how we perceive what surrounds us. When vision deteriorates, the brain stops receiving enough information and begins to weaken. That favors the onset of problems with memory, attention, and orientation. But once dementia sets in, the brain itself stops correctly interpreting the visual signals that still arrive. The result is a vicious circle. Less vision causes more cognitive decline, and more cognitive decline worsens visual perception. This circle is clearly seen in many nursing homes. Consider Doña Emilia, an 84-year-old woman diagnosed with mild dementia. When she arrived at the facility, she already had vision problems from untreated macular degeneration. Over time, her mind grew even more confused, and she no longer recognized even large objects right in front of her. Her brain, weakened by dementia, no longer correctly interpreted the few visual signals it received. In her case, the disease advanced faster, because the combination of both problems, sight and mind, formed a chain that was hard to break. Doctors explain this phenomenon is more common than we think. Vision and the brain work together as a single system. When one fails, it drags the other down, and both deteriorate in a cycle that seems endless. That's why it's so important to break that vicious circle as soon as possible. Correcting vision problems can delay the onset of dementia, and at the same time, stimulating the mind with activities, conversation, and learning helps the brain make better use of the information it receives through the eyes. Sight and mind are intertwined, and caring for them together is the key to maintaining independence and quality of life. And now I ask you, had you ever heard that sight and mind are so deeply connected? If the answer is yes, say so below. I'm interested in what you think of this powerful and often overlooked link. Strategy 1. Regular eye checkups. Caring for your eyes shouldn't be something you do only when you can't see anything anymore. Prevention is the most powerful tool for keeping vision clear and, with it, protecting brain health. After 60, it's essential to visit the ophthalmologist at least once a year, even if we think everything is fine. Many eye diseases like glaucoma progress silently. They don't cause pain or obvious discomfort in the early stages. And yet, when a person finally notices, visual loss is often irreversible. Only regular checkups allow them to be detected in time and treated before it's too late. Think of Don Julian, a 74-year-old man. For years, he ignored medical recommendations because he felt perfectly fine. It was his daughter who insisted on taking him for a routine check. There, he was diagnosed with early-stage glaucoma. Thanks to that finding, he began treatment with drops that allowed him to keep eye pressure under control. Today, years later, he still enjoys reading, walks, and life with clarity. If he hadn't gone for that checkup, he would probably have lost much of his vision. The positive impact of these checkups is immense. Each eye exam can mean the difference between an independent life and a future marked by blindness and cognitive decline. Detecting a problem early not only allows treatment, but also keeps the brain stimulated with the rich visual information it needs. So if you're over 60, don't put it off. Make eye exams a yearly habit. It's a small effort that can save your sight and, with it, your memory. Strategy 2. Use visual aids without shame. Many older people feel resistant to using glasses, magnifiers, or other visual supports. They think doing so is a sign of weakness or old age. But the truth is that these small allies can make a huge difference in quality of life and brain health. Proper glasses restore clarity to reading, TV, and recognizing faces. A well-used magnifier lets you keep enjoying sewing, crosswords, or the details of a photograph. Even something as simple as improving home lighting can make daily life easier and prevent accidents. Doña Mercedes' story shows it. She had stopped reading novels, one of her great passions, because the letters had become impossible to make out. She felt frustrated and sad, and gradually lost interest in other activities. Then, a specialist recommended glasses with the exact prescription she needed. Shortly after, Mercedes was reading with enthusiasm again. She not only regained visual clarity, she also regained joy, energy, and a sense of purpose. Her children noticed she was more active, more alert, and had a better memory. There's no shame in using glasses or magnifiers. On the contrary, it's an act of courage and self-care. Every visual aid is a bridge that keeps the connection between the outside world and the brain. And as long as that connection stays strong, the mind remains more agile and resilient against dementia. So the next time you think about leaving your glasses in the drawer or putting off using them, remember it's not just about seeing better. It's about living better. Strategy 3. Exercises to stimulate the mind when vision fails. Losing part of your vision doesn't mean giving up on keeping your brain active. There are many ways to exercise the mind even when the eyes don't respond as before. One of the simplest and most powerful is listening to audiobooks. Through narration, imagination lights up, mental images are created, and brain areas related to memory and language are stimulated. Music is another ally. Listening to familiar songs awakens memories, activates emotions, and keeps the connection between past and present alive. Even learning new melodies or singing in a community choir can work as a true brain gym. There are also auditory memory games or simple concentration exercises that don't depend on sight. Remembering word lists, repeating sequences, or training attention with sounds are practices that help keep the mind alert. A good example is Don Ricardo. At 82, he lost much of his vision due to advanced glaucoma. However, he refused to resign himself to silence. He began listening to audiobooks every afternoon and set himself the goal of memorizing poems by reciting them aloud. His children were surprised to see that, although he could no longer read as before, he still kept a strong memory and quick conversation. What seemed like a limitation became an opportunity to train his mind in a different way. The lesson is clear. Even if the eyes fail, the brain can keep strengthening if given the right stimulus. Don't give up or stop learning. There are always alternative paths to keep the mind spark alive. Strategy 4. Nutrition for eyes and brain. What we eat every day has a direct impact on the health of our eyes and brain. A diet rich in antioxidants helps protect cells from the damage of aging. Omega-3 fatty acids support retinal health and improve communication between neurons. And vitamins such as A and E are essential for keeping vision sharp and the mind in good shape. Fruits and vegetables with intense colors, like spinach, carrots, blueberries, or peppers, provide the nutrients needed to keep sight clear. Oily fish, such as salmon or sardines, is an excellent source of omega-3 that benefits both eyes and brain. Even nuts in moderate amounts can be powerful allies against cognitive decline. Doña Elena's story is inspiring. At 90, she still maintains surprisingly good vision and a clear memory. When asked her secret, she always said the same thing: "What I put on my plate." From a young age, Elena got used to eating fresh vegetables from her garden, fish several times a week, and very few processed foods. She never considered it medicine, but in reality it was. Her diet was a silent shield that protected her eyes and mind for decades. Science backs what Doña Elena intuited. A healthy diet can delay the onset of eye diseases like macular degeneration and, at the same time, strengthen the brain against cognitive decline. Eating well not only lengthens life, it also improves the quality of every year lived. So next time you sit at the table, remember you're not only feeding your body, you're nourishing your eyes and your brain, building a barrier against vision loss and against dementia. And now tell me, do you think food can also be a form of medicine? If you agree, type the word nutrition in the comments. That way, I'll know you also value the power of food to care for what matters most, the clarity of sight and the lucidity of mind. Strategy 5. The importance of physical movement. The human body is designed to move, and movement is one of the best allies for both sight and brain. Physical exercise improves blood circulation, which means more oxygen and nutrients reach every cell, including the eyes and neurons. Better circulation helps keep the retina healthy, reduce eye pressure, and nourish the brain so it stays active and protected. Great efforts aren't necessary to get benefits. Simple activities like walking, dancing, riding a stationary bike, or practicing stretching exercises are enough to create significant changes. The key is consistency. Moving the body every day keeps the heart, muscles, and mind in shape. Don Leopoldo's story is a clear example. At 79, he was diagnosed with glaucoma, and the doctor recommended, in addition to treatment, adding daily walks. At first he doubted, but decided to try. He started with 15 minutes, then 20, and over time reached nearly an hour a day. Within a few months, specialists noticed that his eye pressure was better controlled and that progression was slower than expected. What's more, his memory and mood improved as well. Walking not only strengthened his body, it also strengthened his mind. Exercise is, in reality, a bridge between eyes and brain. Each step activates circulation, stimulates the production of beneficial hormones, and helps prevent diseases that can worsen vision loss and dementia, such as hypertension or diabetes. So remember, it's not about great sacrifices or intense training. It's about moving a little each day, keeping blood flowing, and giving the eyes and brain the energy they need to keep performing at their best. Strategy 6. The role of family and social support. Caring for vision and mind is not a path we should walk alone. Family plays an essential role in this process. Many times, older adults put off visits to the ophthalmologist or avoid wearing glasses out of shame, fear, or disinterest. That's when support from children, grandchildren, or friends can make the difference. accompanying a loved one to a medical checkup, reminding them of the importance of following treatment, or simply encouraging them to wear their glasses with pride are small but powerful gestures. Emotional and practical support from family not only makes adaptation easier, it also reduces the sense of isolation and boosts self-esteem. Don Arturo and his grandson Andres illustrate this perfectly. Arturo was 76 and had spent months refusing to wear the glasses he'd been prescribed. He said he felt old in them and preferred to give up reading rather than accept his new reality. His 15-year-old grandson Andres decided to join him. He began reading stories to him and showing him how the glasses allowed him to enjoy those stories in a different way. With patience and affection, he convinced him that wearing them wasn't a sign of weakness, but a way to keep sharing moments together. Little by little, Arturo went back to wearing his glasses daily and regained his reading habit. This example reminds us that family is a support network that sustains, encourages, and gives meaning to life. When an older person feels they aren't alone in the process, that they are surrounded by people who accompany and value them, the positive impact multiplies. Visual and mental health don't depend only on medical treatments, but also on human warmth and support. Strategy 7. Keep cognitive stimulation. The brain, like a muscle, needs constant exercise. And even if eyesight fails, there are many ways to keep the mind awake and active. One is through puzzles and board games, which force the brain to plan, remember rules, and make decisions. Music also plays an extraordinary role. Listening to songs, learning an instrument, or even singing in a group stimulates brain regions that strengthen memory and mood. But perhaps the most powerful tool of all is conversation. Talking with others, sharing memories, debating ideas, or simply telling a daily anecdote keeps neurons moving. Social interaction is true cognitive training that requires nothing more than being willing to listen and be heard. An inspiring example is Doña Matilde. At 78, she had fallen into a deep depression after losing vision due to macular degeneration. She felt useless, isolated, and unmotivated. Her family encouraged her to join community workshops where, despite not seeing well, she could listen to readings, take part in debates, and learn new songs. Little by little, Matilda regained her joy. She discovered her mind was still strong, that she could still learn and contribute. Over time, not only did her mood improve, she also regained mental agility and left depression behind. The lesson is clear. Cognitive stimulation is as important as any medical treatment. As long as the brain receives challenges, activities, and company, it will keep functioning strongly. It doesn't matter if the eyes aren't what they used to be, there are always ways to keep the mind awake. Throughout this video, we've taken a deep journey into the connection between sight and mind. We saw 7 truths that show the risks of ignoring vision loss, from how it affects brain stimulation through loneliness, depression, and the risk of falls, to the impact of eye diseases, memory loss, and the vicious circle with dementia. But we also discovered 7 strategies to change course. Regular eye checkups, using visual aids without shame, exercising the mind even if sight fails, caring for nutrition, keeping physical movement, leaning on family, and always seeking cognitive stimulation. Each of these actions is a concrete tool that can help us protect the clarity of our vision and the strength of our brain. The most important message is one of hope. Vision can be cared for, eye problems can be treated, and the risk of dementia can be reduced. It is never too late to take a step in the right direction. Every small change you make today can make a big difference in your future. Always remember this phrase: it's never too late to care for what you look at and what you think. Because your sight and your mind are treasures that deserve attention, respect, and care at every stage of life. Before I say goodbye, I'd love to know your opinion. Which of these truths or tips impacted you the most? Write it in the comments. And if you found this content useful, subscribe to the channel and share it with others who could benefit from this information. Together, we can build a community that values health, clarity, and lucidity in old age. I thank you from the heart for staying with me until the end. I wish you health, strength, and the joy of always keeping your gaze clear and your mind awake. See you in the next video.